Hi, I'm Barbara Vita, and I am reading stories for the Charter Oak Cultural Center. And I've been reading so far books for younger children, and I wanted to pick something too for kids that are older and but still would enjoy being read to. So I chose this section from the from Gonn Iggulden's, I'm sorry if I said that wrong, The Dangerous Book for Boys by Hal Iggulden. Okay, and in it there are extraordinary stories of feat and bravery and strength that I found very interesting. I'm going to read the third one to you. It's called Touching the Void. There are no pictures. It is just going to be my voice reading it. So you can color or doodle or just stare off into space and listen and think. But I found it very interesting and kind of amazing. So here we go. Touching the Void. In May 1985, two young English climbers set off to conquer the unclimbed west face of Sula Grande, a 21,000-foot peak in the Andes. There are no mountain rescue services in such a remote region, but Joe Simpson, 25, and Simon Yates, 21, were experienced, confident, and very fit. Their story is an extraordinary one. Apart from being made into a book and a film, it has inspired intense debate among that small group of expert climbers with experience enough to judge what happened. The two men tackled the face in one fast push, roped together and taking everything they needed with them. They carried ice axes and wore boots with spikes, which are called cramptons, using ice screws and ropes for the ascent. You ascend, you go up, you descend, you go down. They climbed solidly that first day until darkness fell, and they dug a snow cave and slept. All the second day they climbed sheet ice, reaching 20,000 feet when high winds and a blizzard hit them on an exposed vertical drop, or vertical slope. At that point, they were climbing flutes of powder snow, the most treacherous of surfaces and incredibly dangerous. It took 5 to 6 hours to climb just 200 feet in the dark before they found a safe place for a second snow cave. The third morning began with the clear blue sky. By 2 p.m., they reached the North Ridge at last, the first men ever to climb that face of Sula Grande. Both men felt exhausted after some of the hardest climbing of their lives, but they decided to follow the ridge toward the peak. So you have a mountain that's smooth, and a ridge is like a little bit of a window ledge, and that's where they had, and they said, we're going to go up to the rest. They reached it, but with the weather uncertain, they couldn't stay for long. Only half an hour into the descent, clouds came in, and they were lost in a white out on the ridge, completely blind. On one side was a drop of thousands of feet, and the ridge itself was made of overhang cornices of snow that could break off under their weight. Yates saw the ridge through a break in the clouds and climbed back up to it. The cornice broke under his weight, and he fell, saved by the rope attached to Simpson. He shouted up that he had found the ridge. In such conditions, progress was very slow. By the time darkness came, they were still at 20,000 feet. The fourth day, think about that, the fourth day began with good weather once more. The two men came to a cut in the ridge, and Simpson started to climb down a face of sheer ice. He hammered it in one of his ice axes and didn't like the sound it made. As he pulled one out to get a better contact, the other gave way without warning, and he fell. He hit hard, his shin bone going through his knee and into the upper leg. As Yates climbed down, he tried to stand on it, appalled at the pain and grating of the bones. The two men looked at each other in desperation. Simpson expected his friend to leave him. There was no other choice. A broken leg so far from civilization meant that he was dead. Instead, Yates stayed, and they discussed a plan to lower Simpson on 2 ropes knotted together. How many of you would have the presence of mind after being that hurt to be able to have a discussion? Yates would dig himself a seat in the snow and lower Simpson the first 150 feet. That's what they had decided. The knot wouldn't pass through the lowering device, so Simpson would dig in until Yates had retied it and could lower away once more. The laborious process began. The labor-intensive, the hard process began, with Simpson face down. His broken leg jarred constantly, but they had to be fast, as neither their endurance nor the light would last for long. Yates' snow seats crumbled quickly in the time it took to lower his friends. As the hours passed, a full storm hit the mountain with wind chills of 80 degrees below. Darkness came upon them, and both men were exhausted. They had no gas to make tea or get warm. They continued on in the dark, one rope at a time. Simpson felt the powder snow change to hard ice and called out to stop. His voice wasn't heard, and he slipped over the edge of an overhang, dangling below it. He couldn't reach a surface and, crucially, was unable to take his weight off the rope. Above him in the dark, Yates waited alone and freezing, with the wind roaring around him. So here he is, waiting and attached to his friend, and his friend is just attached to nothing. At first, Simpson attempted to climb back up the rope using a Prusik loop, a knot that locks solid once pressure is applied. He needed two and managed to fix the first with frozen hands. The second one escaped his numb fingers, and he watched it fall with his last hopes. Imagine what that must have felt like. He waited then to drag Yates to his death. Yates waited and waited as his seat began to crumble under the unrelenting weight. All he could do was hang on until he began to slide down. He remembered he had a penknife and made a decision in an instant, using it to cut the rope. The rope snaked away, and below the overhang, Simpson fell into darkness, losing consciousness. Yates dug himself a snow cave out of the storm and waited for daylight. Simpson, the fellow who had fallen into unconsciousness, awoke in pitch blackness on a narrow slope, sliding. He had fallen more than 100 feet into a crevice, ending up on an ice ledge next to another drop into infinite darkness. He screwed in an ice screw anchor very quickly. His helmet light revealed the rope going up into a small hole 80 feet above. He thought Yates was on the end of it, dead. Simpson thought the rope would come tight on Yates's body. He pulled it to him and it fell. When he saw the end, he knew it had been cut and guessed what had happened. He was pleased Yates was alive, but realized his own chances of survival had dropped to almost nothing. In the dark, he turned off the light to save the batteries. Alone, he despaired. Yates continued to climb down the next day, so both of these friends think that the other one is dead, basically. Yates continued to climb down the next day. Feeling desperately guilty about cutting the rope, he lowered himself past the overhang and the crevasse, convinced that Simpson was dead. He went on numbly, following tracks back to the base camp that he had made with Simpson only days before. When no one answered his shouts, Simpson tried to climb out of his crevasse, but 80 feet of sheer ice was impossible with only one working leg. He didn't believe anyone would ever find him. His only course seemed to be to sit and wait to die, or to lower himself into the crevasse to see if there was another way out in the darkness below. He made this terrifying decision, but he didn't put a knot at the end of the rope. He decided that if he reached the end and there was nothing beneath him, he would rather fall than be stuck and slowly freeze. Joe lowered himself 80 feet and found he was in an hourglass-shaped crevasse. He reached the pinch point and found a crust of snow there that had a chance of taking his weight. He heard cracking and movement beneath him, but there was light nearby. At the top of the slope, he thought he could climb, bad leg or not. This was the way out. Though every jarring step brought him close to fainting, because it was so incredibly painful, he made it into the mountainside to see a blue sky and bright sunshine. He lay there and laughed with relief at his deliverance. After the initial exhilaration, he looked further down and realized that he still had miles of glacier to cross, as well as a treacherous maze of crevices. He thought at first that he couldn't do it, but there was no point in simply sitting and waiting. He could see Yates's tracks and knew that he would lead them through the crevices field. He made progress sitting down, with his legs flat on the snow and pushing himself along backward. Snow and high winds came again, and he kept going as darkness fell, terrified at losing sight of Simon's tracks. The tracks had gone by the morning of the sixth day. But Simpson struggled on, reaching at last the jumbled boulder that meant the end of the glacier. He wrapped his sleeping mat around the broken leg, using his ice axes to try and support himself over the broken ground. He fell at almost every step, and each fall was like breaking the leg again. Somehow he kept going. He ate snow for water, but there was never enough to quench a brutal thirst. He could hear streams running under the rocks, but maddeningly he could not find them. He pushed himself on and on until he collapsed and lay looking at the sky as it grew dark once more. What a horrible, lonely feeling that must have been. As day 7 dawned, he could barely move at first. He believed he was going to die, but kept crawling. He found a trickle of water and drank liters of it, feeling it making him stronger. Despite this, he was becoming delirious. Simpson reached the lake by the camp by 4 in the afternoon of the 7th day. He knew the camp was in a valley at the far end, but he had no idea if Yates would be there. He tried to make faster progress, plagued by the thoughts that he would get there too late. Clouds came down as the day progressed, and by the time he looked into the valley, it was white with mist. He lay there for a long time, delirious and hallucinating. Eventually, he moved on as night fell, and it began to snow once more. He dragged himself through the latrine area of the camp, and the sharp smell acted like smelling salts, bringing him back. He began to call for Yates, and when no one came at first, he believed he had been left behind. So he thought that the camp had gone and left him because they thought he was dead. Yet Simon Yates had stayed, and he woke up as he heard his name called. When he heard his name again, he went out and began to search. He found his friend a couple of 100 yards from the camp and dragged him back into the tent. Yates could not believe it. He had cut the rope and seen the drop and the crevasse. He knew Simpson could not have survived. As Joe Simpson became conscious, he sought to ease his friend's guilt. His first words were, "Don't worry, I would have done the same." So I just thought that was an amazing story, just about perseverance and strength and determination and love of a friend to another friend. So I hope you think about that over these next few days. Have a great day.